We're often contacted and asked all sorts of questions about Paraguay, and the topic that often comes up is the issue of dogs. It's not uncommon to be contacted by people who have all sorts of thoughts, concerns, sometimes misconceptions when it comes to what they may find in Paraguay in respect to dogs. So I thought it was worth making a video, and the more I thought about it, the more I realised there's a lot to talk about. But the first thing I always like to address when anyone's asking me about dogs here in Paraguay is what I would call two primary misconceptions that I often hear raised. When thinking about any far off place, you would always perhaps be inclined to go to the issue of rabies when thinking about dogs, and is it an issue there? Well, the really good news is Paraguay has done a lot of work to bring rabies mostly under control. You need not be concerned about rabies in Paraguay any more than what you would be in many other countries. You're not going to be coming across dogs walking along the street who are often affected by rabies and are going to bite you. You don't need to be overly concerned. You just need to take the same precautions of what you would in any other country, but it's not really a thing here. So don't worry about that. It's not any more of a concern than many other places that you may be living in right now. The second misconception that some people raise is that they're concerned that there will be marauding bands of dogs or individual dogs that will be wandering around and just preying on people and attacking them for the sake of it. Well, the first thing I want to say in this video is when I'm talking about dogs and issues and considerations, I'm talking about dogs that are demonstrating the behavioural trait of defensiveness as opposed to predatorial aggression. And the good news is that predatorial aggression in Paraguay amongst the dogs, at least in the places I've lived and spent time in, is relatively low. If you have an issue with a dog in Paraguay or a group of dogs, it'll often be due to an issue relating to the behavioural trait of defensiveness. Those type of dogs, in my estimation, probably won't have too long a shelf life in a place like Paraguay, because the people in Paraguay really love their families, they care for each other, and they're not really particularly tolerant to those sorts of behaviours. So you need not be overly concerned that you're going to a country that just has this casual attitude when it comes to those sort of behaviours with dogs. Yes, I'm sure there are parts of the country where it may be an issue, because I've never lived in a country where there hasn't been an issue of predatorial aggression when it comes to dogs in some part of the country. But in all of the areas I've spent time in and the issues that I've heard other people talk about, I've definitely heard about people having issues with dogs at times. I've had an odd encounter with a dog, but it's always been due to a defensive situation, a defensive trait that the animal is exhibiting. And that's a really important thing to take into account, because I'm going to talk more about some situations and environments that you may be more inclined to come across issues relating to dogs. And also I'm going to offer some tips that I would suggest might be worth considering when dealing with a situation like that. And in both of those cases, it's really important to keep in mind that we're talking about defensive traits rather than predatorially aggressive traits, because you're talking about two different animals essentially. But before getting into that, I just wanted to talk about the symbiotic relationship that Paraguayans have with their dogs, because in order to understand what you're going to encounter, you really need to examine how animals and humans interrelate in the country that you're going to. Paraguayans have a very relaxed attitude when it comes to their dogs as compared to many places I've been. There is a general acceptance that a dog is often allowed to just wander the streets. Mrs. Gomez just down the road has let her little shepherd cross wander around, and he does his little circuit and has his group of friends. It's a very common thing. There's also the situation where people have dedicated guard dogs, and in Paraguay you can have just about any breed that you could think of. In those cases, those dogs are pretty much buckled down, kept in very high fences, and their job is to defend the house. They're not allowed out. When I'm talking about dogs that are allowed to wander, I'm talking about generally the more scrawny, sort of shepherdy, sort of Labradory, poodly, cross type things. They wander around, they've got their little circuit and their little group of friends, and that is very common, and it's something that you just need to get your head around. At most supermarkets, cafes and restaurants that we go to, you'll often come across what I would call their resident dog. There will be a dog that has decided that that particular facility or shop is theirs. They hang out there, they sit out the front, they wait for people to give it some food, the staff put coats on it. The dog can often be really quite well cared for, regardless of whether it's a street dog or it's owned. That's just a feature of Paraguay and something you just need to sort of get your head around. But it's also an insight into the attitude that people have towards dogs here. They are generally a kind people. So that bodes well generally when it comes to the issue of dogs and their behaviour towards humans, because show me a place that's generally a cruel country, whether it's to their animals or to each other, and you'll generally find animals that behave likewise. So what are some situations and environments that you're more likely to come across issues in regards to dogs? Just places and things you need to be more mindful of when you're getting around Paraguay. Whenever you're walking down a street and it's a residential environment, you should always be cautious of walking too close to gates and fences. If there is a dog that is there for the purpose of guarding the property, they're generally right on that fence line, and it can give you a hell of a fright if you're walking along and you're like 1 foot away from a fence and all of a sudden a muzzle comes out of the gap between the fence and starts chomping away like it wants to take your leg off. It's happened to me quite recently. You come across those sort of situations, and apart from it being possibly dangerous if you're too close to the fence, it can scare the absolute shit out of you, and it's something that I'm always mindful of. When I'm walking past a house, I always maintain a reasonable gap to let the dog know that I'm not right at the gate wanting to break into it. Just something that you need to be mindful of. And likewise, if you are riding a bike past any house, whether it's during the day, more often at night when there's not many people around, you've always got to be on the lookout for dogs just all of a sudden rushing out of the property. Hopefully most of the time they're locked in, but it's happened to me on 2 occasions where I've been on my motorbike and without any notice, a dog has just rushed out, and I don't know, because I was too busy riding like a bat to get out of the place, but the dog was really close there nearby, just defending his turf, a classic defensive behaviour. But just be mindful whenever you're around houses, the issue of defensiveness in dogs is always going to be heightened. So just maintain a reasonable distance, keep your wits about you. When you're walking down a quiet street or a back road, because there isn't as much traffic there, you may be more inclined to come across a dog or a number of dogs who are just part of the fabric of that street, not so used to having people walk down their street every day. Because it's a quiet street, the owners may have given them a more liberal license to wander around. So all those things combined is such that makes quiet streets, in my view, a heightened risk in terms of encountering a defensive behaviour in a dog. Be very careful when you're walking down streets that you don't know, quiet streets, back roads, alleys. They're the sort of places that you will, more likely than not, encounter a dog that considers that you're walking on their turf. There aren't many people around. He may not be as inclined to have the experience of dealing with people walking down his road. It's just something that you need to be mindful of. If you don't know a little quiet street that you want to walk along, perhaps it's worth, in the first instance, driving down the street just to see what's going on there, just sussing it out. But be careful when it comes to back roads, little alleys and quiet streets. I think they're definitely areas that you need to be mindful of. Often when I go for a jog, I'll run through the city centre of the town that we live in. And I'll run through the streets where there's a lot of shops and a lot of traffic during the week. Well, on a public holiday or a Sunday, that traffic isn't there and the people have gone. So you've got pretty much deserted main thoroughfares. And what I've actually found is that when the humans vacate, the dogs move in. Perhaps it's because there might be a greater availability of food in those areas, more bins in those areas where the shopping and people congregate. So when the humans aren't there, it's a great opportunity for the dogs to move in and have a bit of a fiesta. I find that in those areas, I'll often come across dogs that will behave in a defensive sort of manner, defending a scrap of food or a bag of whatever that's been dumped by somebody. But it's just something that I've observed. I don't know if it's a common thing, but it definitely is where I frequent when I go for a run or walk around the place. Just something to keep in mind. Wherever humans congregate and then for some reason aren't there for a couple of days, just be mindful that dogs will sometimes move into those areas, and you just need to be mindful that what they're doing may cause them to behave in a defensive manner. Whenever I'm walking along the road or the street or wherever I am, I'm always looking out for rubbish bins. Food is invariably in rubbish bins, and dogs that are wandering around will know all about it. When you're walking down the street, always be looking out if there's a rubbish bin just up around the corner or just up the road. Just keep an eye out. If there are any dogs in the vicinity, be aware that there's a good chance that they will be quite defensive about their rubbish bin. They may have eyed something off, even if they've kind of wandered away from it a little bit. Dogs can be quite sly, and I've noticed that what they'll do is they'll eye off a rubbish bin and then they'll be just across the road, and it's almost like they're just sussing out what's going to go on here. And you just need to be kind of careful in that situation. There's a few bins on the road to where I run commonly, and more often than not, there's a dog somewhere congregating around and eyeing off a morsel in the bin there. So I'm always mindful to make sure that I run on the other side of the road, and I keep a good eye on that dog to make sure that he knows that I'm not really much competition when it comes to his treat that he's eyeing off in his bin. At least in the areas that I've lived in Paraguay, walking your dog on a leash isn't a common thing. I like to get out regularly with our dogs if we can and take them for a walk. But commonly I'm looked at like I'm a bit of a weirdo, and it's not really all that common, particularly because I've got some quite munty dogs. My dogs are beautiful and good-natured, but to look at them, you would be quite concerned. What I've noticed is that when I'm walking around the park and I've got my dogs on a leash, I really do get some stares because people aren't all that inclined to take their dogs for a walk on a leash. They're either the sort of dogs that are permanently locked up in a yard to guard the yard, or they're allowed to roam around. Because you're in a situation where you're doing something that's not all that usual, you need to be mindful that the dogs in the area will really take notice. And because you've got your dog on a leash, you don't know how another dog might behave. Hopefully it's not in a predatorially aggressive way, but even if it's in a defensive way, you're just in a situation where you're kind of a bit vulnerable because you've got your dog with you, and if another dog approaches and attacks, it can be a really sticky situation. Just something that you need to be mindful of. If you do move here with the dog, be very wary about how you go about walking it. Just suss out where you're going. There may be some places in Paraguay where you can safely walk your dog around. At least in the area that I live, there's not really anywhere. There is a park, but it's not commonly done. I've seen it on the odd occasion, but it's not commonly done. And I'd be quite loath to walk them just around the streets of our town because you just don't know what you're going to encounter. Just something to think about. If you're jogging along a street, well, maybe the dogs have never seen anyone jogging, or at least along that street. So all I'm saying is that be quite cautious, because a dog will be startled by humans' behaviour, particularly if it's outside of its norm of what it's used to seeing. I know when I go for a jog, dogs kind of look at me as if to say, what on earth is that? It might just be my style. But the point I make is that if you're just going to randomly go out for a jog, if you've just landed in Asuncion or some other part of the country, just be thinking about where you're going to run to, and maybe ask around. I don't know, there's probably different ways that you can suss it out. But just be aware that if you go for a jog, I know that we all tend to get into that altered state that we are in when we're going for a jog. You can't outrun a dog anyway, and unless you are like one step away from being able to jump over something that you can't, well, you're not going to really beat it in that situation. So running from a dog, really all you're going to do is heighten its prey drive. So even if it wasn't predatorially aggressive when it started, by running, you've really excited it. You don't want to excite a dog into thinking, oh, this is cool, I've got the two-legged, pasty-faced dog on the run, I'm going to have a bit of fun here. You don't want to make the situation worse by running. Never a good move. Most sources of information would say never make eye contact with a dog because it appears that you are challenging it. Well, I think that that's probably got some level of truth to it. But it also relies on a number of different factors. If I'm walking along the road and there's some squirrely, poodly, shepherdy dog that's just defending half a empanada, and I inadvertently stumble across its path and it really rushes at me, I will be personally more inclined to really try and send a strong message to the dog that it's not a good idea to keep coming and for us to have an issue. He's better off to just stay where he is, and I'll vacate the scene and let him live happily ever after with his booty. Now, for me, a lot of the time when I'm encountering a dog like that, I like to look as directly at it as possible. I'm not really that mindful about whether I'm looking it in the eye or whether I'm looking anywhere else, but I really do let the dog know that I'm looking directly at it and I'm standing in quite an assertive way, and that it's probably a good idea for the dog to reconsider his strategy. And obviously, if you're faced with a generally dangerous, predatorially aggressive dog, whether you look it in the eye or look it in the belly button or the ear, it's probably not going to make a ton of difference. I don't really think that the dog's going to go, oh, he's not looking me in the eye, so I'll probably cut him a pass on this occasion. It's whatever works for you. But quite often, a lot of these dogs are just kind of fairly snippety little dogs, and I find that the best message that you can send to them is that you know that they're there, you are looking straight at them, whether it's in the eye or anywhere else, and that there is probably a better course of action that the dog can take. The really important thing to do is identify what is the thing that the dog's defending. If you think about the things that I've spoken about earlier, if you're walking down a quiet street, it's probably defending its house. If you're walking along an empty road, it's got a footpath and a rubbish bin, well, there's a good chance it may have something eyed off in the rubbish bin. Whatever it's defending, you really want to try and identify it, because that's the key to knowing what you want to move away from, or at least not go near in the first place. So I know it sounds perhaps really and obvious, but when you're in that sort of situation, often the first thing that goes is your own logic, because you're in a fight or flight response and things just go numb. So if you are confronted by a dog that's behaving in a defensive stance, really identify what's going on here. What is it defending? What is it wanting? What does it want me to do? And then we can sort this out without anyone getting hurt. And the bonus tip that I have in regards to at least a consideration that you may have when dealing with a dog is that here in Paraguay and everywhere else in South and Central America I've travelled through, it's very common to see if a dog is behaving in an antisocial way, that people will often bend down and motion as though they're picking up a rock to throw at it. Yeah, I know, that probably sounds a little bit barbaric, but that is a universal language when it comes to humans and dogs, at least in Paraguay, and I've seen it in many other places where we've travelled through or spent time in. And it's remarkably consistent. I have personally had to employ it myself, I think once, and it definitely did the trick. And I've seen people do it countless times, and they're not necessarily picking anything up to throw at the animal, but they're just motioning that that may be something that they may have to contend with, and it's often enough to back that dog up. And who are we to judge? That is just the way humans often communicate with their animals in this part of the world, or at least with dogs. But I think it's one of those tactics that can be classified as a distractive strategy. You're simply just giving the dog a moment to think, whether it's through maintaining that eye contact, behaving assertively, acting like you want to pick up a rock, having something in your hand that you look like you might be ready to wield. Whatever it is, if you have to do something, well, these things are at least things that you can consider. But I do want to stress that when I'm talking about these situations, I'm talking about dogs that are behaving in a defensive manner. If you are encountering a predatorially aggressive dog situation, well, that's a pretty dire situation that you've got yourself in. It can happen in any country. I have not seen it happen here in Paraguay, but I imagine it does happen from time to time. And you're really going to have to just respond on the basis of the circumstances, what you've got available, what you're capable of, what sort of dog it is. So many variables, it's just not even worth contemplating, really. If it's a topic that you're interested in, there's a lot of resources out there. I've got a particular view and approach that I might adopt that might be different to yours, depending on what your proclivities are. But the important thing to know is that when we're dealing with dogs that are behaving in a defensive way, it's generally a case that if you apply certain strategies, certain approaches, you'll generally get mutually agreeable outcome. And that's what we're really about. I just want to leave you with the reassurance that dogs in Paraguay are not a massive issue in terms of what you need to be really worried about. If you are mindful of the differences, the things that you might encounter, and the realities of how dogs and humans behave here, you're going to be fine. Just be mindful that it's a different place, things are done in a different way, the humans are different, the animals are different, and hopefully we can all get along. Nothing in this world's guaranteed, but of all the things you need to be concerned about, I think that dogs in Paraguay isn't particularly high on the list. I personally love dogs. I love the way that dogs are treated here. I think that it's really wonderful that they're more integrated into the society. But whether you like that or not, the reality is that's Paraguay, and if you come here, you're going to have to deal with it. So there it is, just my thoughts about dogs. Interesting topic, lots of differing opinions out there, and mine is just one of many. So please feel free to comment below and let me know what I've got right and what I've got wrong. It's amazing how many strong views there are about dogs in particular, and someone's always got something that they've got to offer. And hopefully there's something in this video that is useful, and that's what it's all about. Until next time, take care. Ciao.